All right, here's a little overview on question number one. So this question has us opposing Rene Descartes and David Hume. As you see, the prompt kind of leads with Hume. It jumps right into his theory of ideas and asks you how that can be utilized as some kind of counter argument to Descartes. So that's what you want to make sure you're doing in organizing this paper. Make sure that you're setting up that kind of opposition and specifically drawing upon Hume's theory of ideas, which is in the reading. I also have a handout for that, so I'm not going to summarize that. That's where it talks about impressions and ideas. Simple impressions get copied into simple ideas, and he has this kind of dictum that there can be no intelligible concept that doesn't in some way trace back to an impression. So all ideas that have any merit must ultimately be traced back to impressions. So you can kind of press that against Descartes. Would he be able to do that specifically, let's say, with respect to the self? Um, That's one thing that Hume famously pushed against Descartes in Meditation 2. Descartes, takes his victory over the skeptic with the famous dictum cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. That's actually not directly in the Meditations, that's actually in the Principles of Philosophy, but that's a small point. Anyways, um, he says with certainty that I exist, and the self is this thing that thinks. That's what the I that exists is. And there I think he's got his foundation of certainty, and thus he's got his victory over the skeptic that seemed to have the upper hand in Meditation 1. So this question is asking you to see if we can apply Hume's criteria to Descartes' claims. Can he really still say that he's got a foundation of certainty if we approach it Hume style, so to speak? So another point is that Descartes thinks that he exists as a thing that thinks, as a self. So Hume would then ask, well, from what impressions do you get this idea and knowledge of yourself? Have you actually experienced yourself? So that's a famous criticism of Hume, exactly where he's applying his theory of ideas against Descartes to say, well, you really couldn't have this clear idea of self because there's no clear impression of the self, i.e., an experience of the self, rather than the thoughts that the self thinks. That's not the worry. Hume does think we can have clear experiences and impressions of those, of our own thoughts, but not of the thing that thinks those thoughts. And that's what Descartes says he is. So that's one kind of clear example. In general, if there is no external world, there's a real question as to how we could come to have ideas, especially with the Humean theory of ideas. So how is it then that there are thoughts that we can think if there are no impressions that give rise to those thoughts? How do we explain that? So that's a couple things that Descartes is really subject to now as objections from David Hume, even when Descartes is kind of taking his victory lap and takes himself to have championed over the skeptic. Hume comes in and raises some pretty good questions. So that's the general ballpark of content there. And earlier I had given you a general sense of like how to structure that. It's kind of as much as what I'll do now, but that should give you enough that you can go back into these readings with that structure in mind and having an idea that you're going to be playing Hume against Descartes in that kind of way. So the kind of need to know stuff here, I need to see that you can quickly get out Descartes' skeptical argument in Meditation 1. That should be very quick. Then quickly show how his meditation 2 argument appears to supersede the meditation 1 argument, which is skeptical. State clearly what the conclusion of the meditation 2 argument is, where he establishes the foundation of certainty, then enter these Humean criticisms like I've been discussing. Okay, so that should be a good thing to get you started, and you can ask me any questions as we get towards the end. All right.